The young and the restless spoilers in the sprawling chaos left behind in the French Riviera, where blood had stained elegance and betrayal crept through every corner of a once idyllic estate. A single question continued to haunt the survivors of the horror that had unfolded: who was Carter, and what hellish game had he truly come to play? The name now echoed like a curse across every hallway, behind every whisper, and inside every devastated heart. Carter. So long believed to be a shadowy assistant, a mere pawn at Kane's side, had detonated a truth so explosive that it left both bodies and trust in ruins. Damien was dead, his body cold beneath marble tiles that once gleamed with the luxury of indulgent power. Nick, wounded and drenched in blood, had narrowly escaped death but remained spiritually shattered. And Chance, the last bastion of law among liars, now lay on the edge of eternity, his fate uncertain after a shot meant for justice pierced through chaos instead. Yet it was none of these tragic turns that truly unhinged Genoa City. It was the revelation that Carter, the cold-eyed manipulator, the man who held Lily hostage and played God with lives, was not some orphaned mercenary nor a fringe criminal opportunist. He was Diane's son. The revelation did not arrive with dignity or ceremony. It spilled into the air with venom during a late-night confrontation in one of the estate's sealed private chambers. Diane had cornered Carter, her voice hushed and trembling, not from fear, but from a terrible, calculated restraint. Carter, once obedient and cool-headed, now throbbed with rage. The two of them had danced in deception for too long, and the mask had finally cracked. He screamed at her, not with desperation but with years of rejection that now demanded blood. He wanted to be acknowledged. He wanted his name spoken aloud. He wanted what had been denied to him for his entire life: identity. Diane had concealed his existence like a shameful secret, and now that everything had spiraled out of control, Carter could no longer play the loyal ghost. Her hesitation, her cowardice, her obsession with control, those were the real betrayals in his mind. The chaos wasn't his design alone. It was born of her silence. And Jack heard it all. Standing on the other side of the wine cellar door, Jack's world fractured in complete silence. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He hadn't gone there seeking truth. But truth, when it finds its way to you uninvited, leaves scars far deeper than lies. Jack had trusted Diane. He had rebuilt her. He had protected her against the world's condemnation. He had been ready to overlook her sins for the chance of peace. But now, this secret son, this violent, deceptive creature she had hidden, felt like the ultimate betrayal. And what's worse, the monster was her own blood. The carnage, the fear, the madness. As Jack now understood that it wasn't random. It was a legacy. A bloodline he never knew existed, born of secrecy, raised in resentment, and now returned to destroy everything in his path. The world Carter knew had become unbearable. He wanted to burn it all. Diane's cowardice in keeping him hidden from the Newman clan, from the Abbotts, from the world itself, felt like a declaration that he was never good enough to be part of it. So, he created chaos, not because he wanted power, but because he wanted to force the world to see him. His violence was a language he believed they would finally listen to. His manipulation was a twisted form of justice. But even then, buried beneath layers of bitterness and rage, there was a boy who had once waited for his mother to claim him. That boy had died long ago, and what stood in his place was a man ready to leave a trail of bodies behind if that's what it took to make her pay. Diane's motives, however, remained murky. Was she the architect behind this bloodshed? Or was she simply a woman who had made too many choices based on fear, only to watch them spiral into uncontrollable destruction? Her face in the dim light of that confrontation had held no malice, only the haunted expression of a woman whose secrets had turned into weapons. Whether she had sent Carter down this path or not, she had fed his fury with silence, and now the silence had turned fatal. The question now tormenting Jack wasn't just how Diane could have hidden Carter, it was how much of his madness she had anticipated. How much of it she understood. And worse, whether part of her, deep down, believed he was right to punish the Newmans for decades of arrogance and control. For Carter, the only way forward was through fire. His decision to leave Nice wasn't a retreat. It was a vow. He would walk away not because he was defeated, but because the battlefield had simply moved. He no longer needed Diane's validation. He had tasted the power of shaking the foundations of Genoa City, and he liked the way the world trembled. Lily had survived him. Nick had bled because of him. Chance may never walk again because of him. But they had all seen the truth now. The name Carter no longer belonged to a servant or a sidekick. It belonged to a ghost resurrected by lies and sharpened by abandonment. A name that carried with it the fury of a lifetime of silence. Jack, devastated and furious, returned home with a storm brewing beneath his calm facade. The pain of Diane's lies cut deeper than any wound Carter had inflicted. He had forgiven her for so many crimes, for deceit, for manipulation, for aligning herself with enemies. But this hidden son with a vendetta and a gun, felt like the end of any justification. Diane had brought war into their lives through the back door. She had let a monster bloom in the dark, and Jack could no longer tell if she was a victim of her own fear or the secret puppet master of the carnage. Meanwhile, Genoa City stirred with rumors and suspicion. Victor, livid about the threat to his children and the shame brought to the Newman name, began quietly assembling information about Carter's origins. The thought that Diane might have allowed a bastard son to target his empire boiled his blood. Nicky, more composed but equally cold, began planning how to politically dismantle Diane once and for all. For them, this was no longer personal. It was war. And war in Genoa City is never fought with just bullets. It's fought with secrets, whispers, and psychological destruction. Phyllis, who once stood at the edge of obsession and hatred for Diane, now found herself shocked into clarity. She always suspected Diane of being dangerous, but even she had underestimated just how far the rot extended. A son hidden from the world, molded in rage and violence, and now at the center of a deadly conspiracy, Diane had birthed more than a child. She had unleashed a symbol of everything she refused to confront. And yet, part of Phyllis, dark, cynical, and ever calculating, began to wonder if Carter's fury could be redirected. If used properly, Carter could still be a weapon, just not Diane's. As Diane remained trapped between shame and defense, unsure whether to chase her son or mourn him, the world she built began to close in. The Abbotts questioned her loyalties. The Newmans plotted revenge. And Carter, now free of every mask, disappeared into shadows with only one clear purpose. Return stronger, return smarter, and return when they least expected it. His exile from Nice was not a surrender. It was an intermission. His story was not finished, it had only just torn through the first chapter. And Genoa City, still reeling from the carnage, had no idea that the worst was yet to come. Would you like me to continue this arc into the next phase, such as Carter's return to Genoa City, Diane's reckoning, or a dramatic courtroom showdown involving Jack, Victor, and Nick? The walls of Diane's carefully constructed world were beginning to collapse. No longer protected by shadows or half-truths, she now stood naked in front of a truth she could no longer run from. Her face was pale, not just from fear, but from the dawning realization that the web she'd spun for decades had finally strangled itself. The secret she had buried, the son she had hidden, was no longer content with invisibility. Carter had emerged from the darkness, unleashed by rage, and in his wake lay chaos, gunfire, betrayal, and the dead. And now, Jack knew everything. But Diane wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. With trembling hands and a voice straining under the weight of desperation, she pleaded with Jack, begging him not to believe the worst. She insisted she wasn't a traitor. That she had never intended for things to unravel like this. That Carter's pain, however justified, had grown beyond her control. That she had tried to shield everyone, not just herself, but Jack too, from a storm she never believed would break. She begged him to see her as the woman who had tried to change, who had fought for redemption, who had chosen love over secrecy, only too late. Jack, however, was no longer the man she could easily persuade. He stood before her not as a lover or a confidant, but as a man betrayed for the last time. His eyes, once so forgiving, so open to the idea that people could evolve, were now cold, laced with fury and exhaustion. He told her in no uncertain terms that someone had to be held accountable for what had happened in Nice. For Damien's death. For Nick's injuries. For the bullet that might still end Chance's life. And if Diane played even a passive role in the chain of events that allowed Carter to strike, then she was no better than the one who pulled the trigger. But Diane wasn't finished yet. Her final weapon wasn't deception, it was raw, trembling truth. She confessed everything. She spoke of the night Carter was born, the shame she had felt, the man she refused to name, and the fear that drove her to give the boy up. She told Jack of the letters she never sent, the photos she burned, and the years she spent trying to believe that cutting him off had been an act of mercy. But mercy curdled into neglect, and Carter had grown up in shadows, fueled by abandonment and convinced that his only power would come from destruction. Diane had never meant for any of it to happen. But she admitted, for the first time, that she had been a coward. A coward who had waited too long to tell the truth. A coward who now feared not just prison, but Jack's hatred. Then came the ultimate plea. Diane dropped to her knees, not for theatrics, not for manipulation, but because she could no longer stand under the weight of her own shame. She begged Jack to keep this secret. To protect her. To understand that prison would not just destroy her life, but that of Kyle, Harrison, and everyone they loved. She swore she would cooperate. She would tell the police what she knew. But she didn't want her name dragged through courtrooms and headlines. She didn't want the people of Genoa City to turn on her again. She didn't want to be a villain. Not this time. Jack stared at her, unmoved at first. The silence between them was unbearable. Outside, the wind carried the echoes of a world already fraying at the seams, but inside, time froze. This was not a question of legality, it was a question of conscience. Diane had lied. She had concealed the truth. Her secret had led to suffering, injury, and death. And yet, she was still human. Still capable of love. Still someone he once believed in. And in that conflict, Jack found himself torn between justice and mercy, punishment and protection. Meanwhile, Carter was already preparing to leave Nice. The chaos had served its purpose. The truth had been exposed. He had finally been seen. And yet, as he packed a simple bag and changed into fresh clothes, there was no sense of triumph. Only isolation. The conversation with Diane had not brought him closure. It had only reinforced the truth he had always feared, that even now, she would rather beg someone else to protect her than claim him as her son before the world. He was still her shame. Still her burden. And so he would leave, not out of surrender, but because he no longer needed her permission to exist. But Carter wouldn't get far. Jack had made a decision. He confronted Carter before his departure, standing firm between him and the exit gate of the estate. There was no fight, no raised voices, no last-minute bloodshed. Only truth. Jack told Carter that he would not allow him to vanish into the world again. Not after what he'd done. Damien's family deserved answers. Nick deserved justice. And if Carter had any shred of remorse left inside him, he would come to Genoa City and face the consequences. Not as a son in hiding, but as a man accountable. To Jack's surprise, Carter agreed. But only on one condition: Diane would not be arrested. She had made mistakes, yes. But the bloodshed had been his. He would not let the world destroy her for sins that were his to bear. For the first time, Jack saw something almost noble in Carter, twisted and tragic, yes. But sincere. The monster had a soul after all. And perhaps, just perhaps, Diane had not completely failed in trying to raise one from ashes. Back in Genoa City, the fallout began. Jack returned with Diane and Carter in tow. The news spread quickly. Carter had been revealed as Diane's son, and he was now facing legal consequences for his actions in Nice. The public was outraged. The Newman family demanded retribution. Lily, still emotionally shattered by being taken hostage, refused to look either of them in the eye. Nikki, ever the strategist, began compiling a list of allies to force Diane out of any power circles she still touched. And Victor, whose son had nearly died, swore he would never forgive her. Carter would go to jail. But Diane, Victor said, would be tried in the court of public opinion, and she would not survive it. Diane tried to stay quiet, to keep her head down. But Genoa City didn't forget. Every glance in the grocery store, every whisper at society, every glare at the park, it all reminded her that her past would never stop poisoning her present. Still, she clung to Jack. Not out of manipulation, but because he was now her only shield. Jack did what he could, but even he began to feel the weight of isolation. Defending Diane had cost him friends, strained his family, and now threatened to divide the entire Abbott legacy. Then came the trial. Carter stood in a courtroom packed with reporters and old enemies, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. He didn't try to run. He didn't try to excuse himself. He confessed, publicly and without emotion. He admitted to staging the chaos in Nice, to manipulating events, and to seeking revenge for a lifetime of neglect. He told the court that Diane had not orchestrated the violence. That she had tried to stop him, even if too late. His confession spared her the cell, but it did not spare her reputation. As the gavel fell and Carter was led away in chains, Diane stood alone at the back of the courtroom, hands folded, face unreadable. She had avoided prison, but lost everything else. Kyle could barely speak to her. Jack, while loyal, was no longer warm. And Carter, her son, was gone again, this time behind bars. She had survived, but what remained was a life hollowed out by the truths she had buried. And Jack? He would never forget. He would never entirely forgive. But somewhere in the silence of his thoughts, he understood something vital. Some secrets, once unearthed, don't just shatter trust, they rewrite the definition of love itself. Would you like the next part to focus on Carter's time in prison, Diane's attempt to rebuild her life, or the way the Newman family retaliates? I can also build a new arc with Phyllis, Lily, or Kyle depending on where you want to go next.